Well, welcome everyone to this latest edition of Stories for Healing. As you know, this is a project that started back in the later part of October, and now here we find ourselves in 2021, still going strong. Still, unfortunately, with the need for healing and reconciliation, but no end of supplies with storytellers who are ready to help us with that by telling these kinds of stories. Today, I'm really pleased to be able to welcome back Quinn Golden for us, who has another story to share for us. So, Quinn, please tell us a story.
Hello, Jim. Thank you very much for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege and an honor to be here. I'd like to share this story with you that I think is a real good story of healing and self-forgiveness, which is really important during this holiday season, particularly coming just off of Christmas when we get the letdown of the post-holiday season. And it is a Christmas story, but it's called A Cup of Christmas Tea. And it's a story my wife introduced to me several years ago. And I think it's a marvelous story, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to share it with you today. The log was in the fireplace, all spiced and set to burn. At last, the annual Christmas race was in the clubhouse turn. Cards were in the mail, the gifts under the tree, and a 30-day reprieve before Visa could catch up with me. Although smug satisfaction seemed the order of the day, something was fairly nagging at me, and it wouldn't go away. You see, a week ago, I got a letter from my old great aunt, and she wrote, "Of course, I'll understand completely if you can't, but if you find you have some time, how wonderful it would be if we could maybe have a chat and share a cup of Christmas tea." You see, a stroke earlier that year had crippled her left side. Though housebound now, my folks had said it hadn't hurt her pride. They said she'd love to see you, and how wonderful it would be if you could maybe go and have that cup of Christmas tea. Oh, I did not want to go. Oh, what a bitter pill to see an older family member who'd gone so far downhill. I remembered her as vigorous, as funny and bright. I remembered Christmas Eve when she regaled us half the night. I did not want to lose all that. I didn't want the pain. I didn't need the depression. I didn't need the strain. And what about my brother? Yeah, what about him? It's his aunt too. I thought I had it justified, but then before I knew all of the reasons not to go I so painstakingly had built were cracking wide and crumbling in an acid rain of guilt. So I put on boots and gloves and cap, and shame stinging every pore, armed with a snow brush, sand, and a map, I went out my front door. I drove in from the suburbs to the older part of town. The pastels of the newer homes gave way to grays and browns. I had a disembodied feeling when the car pulled up and stopped beside the little wooden house that held the Christmas cup. How I got up to her front door, I really cannot tell. I watched my hand as if from afar rise up and ring the bell. I stood there, aided nervously by my rocking to and fro. And just as I thought to myself, that's it, I'm just going to go, I heard the familiar rattle of the china in the hutch against the wall. And then the triple beat of 2 feet and a crutch coming down the hall. The click of the lock, the sliding of the bolt. And with a little swollen tug, the door popped open with a jolt, and there she stood before me, looking tiny and fragile as an egg. I forced myself to keep from staring at the brace that held her leg, and through her thick bifocals seemed to crack and spread her eyes. Their milky and refractive depths lit up in young surprise. "Come in, come in." She laughed the words, and she took me by the hand, and all of my fears dissolved, as if by her command. We went inside and closed the door before I knew how to react. Before my eyes, my ears, and my nose was Christmas past, alive, intact. The scent of candied oranges, of cinnamon, of pine, the little wooden soldiers in their military line, the porcelain nativity I'd always loved so much, the Dresden and the crystal that I'd been told I mustn't touch. My spirit fairly bolted like a child out of class. It danced amongst the ornaments of calicos and glass, and like magic, I was 6 again, deep in a Christmas spell, steeped in the million memories that the boy inside knew well. And there, amongst all the old cards so lovingly displayed, a place of special honor for the ones that we kids had made. And there, beside her rocking chair, in the center of it all, my great aunt stood and said how nice it was I'd come to call. Oh, I sat down and began to patter about the weather and the flu, and she listened very patiently, and then she said, "So what's new?" Thoughts and words began to flow, and I started making sense. I lost that phony breeziness that I use when I get tense. She was passionately interested in everything I did. She was positive, encouraging, just like when I was a kid. Vague generalities still threw her into fits. She demanded the particulars. She wanted all of them in the bits. And we talked about the limitations that she'd had to face. She spoke with utter candor and humor and good grace. And then, defying the reality of crutch and straightened knee, on wings of hospitality, she dashed off to brew the tea. I sat there alone with feelings I had not felt in years. I looked around at Christmas through a thick, hot glaze of tears. The candles and the holly she'd arranged on every shelf. The impossibly good cookies she still somehow baked herself. Yet through all of these real and tangible memories, was stacked up quite pale and thin compared to the Christmas that my great aunt kept deep within. Her body halved and nearly spent, but my great aunt was whole. I saw a Christmas miracle, the triumph of a soul. The triple beat of 2 feet and a crutch coming down the hall, and the familiar rattle of the china in that hutch against the wall. She poured 2 cups and smiled and handed one to me. And we sat back and enjoyed a cup of Christmas tea. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed that. It's called A Cup of Christmas Tea.
Oh, thanks, Quinn. Thanks. That's a beautiful story. And I just want to compliment you on the telling of it as well, because despite the fact that, it's a very carefully crafted rhyme, it really, you bring it to life. That's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
Um,
you.
how did you come across this story? You mentioned
Yeah,
your wife brought it to you?
my wife loved it. She found it several years ago, and I don't know where and how she heard of it, but she bought the book, and the book became part of our Christmas decor, packed away every year, and then coming out when all the Christmas stuff comes out. And that's just what she does. And this year, a week ago, just a scant week ago, we were in an antique store, and we found this cup and saucer. And if
Oh
you go
my
inside,
goodness. A cup of Christmas
it,
tea.
it is evidently a promotional cup or something that came with it originally or was sold to accompany it.
Yeah.
And we actually found it this year. And so it will go in with our Christmas
Oh, absolutely.
and become part of our Christmas memories for decades to come.
Yeah, yeah, something to pass down. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I just want to remind people that this is the kind of stuff you get to partake in when you come to Stories for Healing. Stories that sometimes are uplifting and like they are today, sometimes challenging, but always healing, always trying to push for transformation and healing and reconciliation. As I mentioned before, you can find them on Facebook or on the YouTube channel. And I want to encourage you to share the stories, share the links, but share the stories. But even more importantly, um, share some of that good Christmas tea that comes from an open heart. And we'll see you next episode. Bye-bye.